this is not the behavior I want in my future wife, much less my girlfriend right now. Like,
he started playing Vicky after I asked him not to.
You got to button like Nikki.
Not only that, but he's dancing with some other random girl and flirting with her right in front of me.
This isn't the fake news. If tonight is a problem, that's gonna throw me off. I don't know if I could deal with that. That's not what I signed up for.
The moment Stig steps on stage, something shifts. Not in the room, but in Aviva's body. Because she already knows what song is coming, and she also knows she asked him not to do this while she was sitting right there, watching him smile like nothing mattered, like her discomfort was background noise, instead of the main event.
I forgot. All the new songs I forgot. You're distracting me. I am so pissed. I can't even think straight right now.
The music starts, the crowd leans in, and Stig leans forward too. Not just into the mic, but into the attention, soaking it up, flirting with women in the front row, locking eyes, performing confidence, while Aviva sits there realizing her boundary just got ignored in public, loudly, and on purpose. This is the moment everything cracks. Because this was not a misunderstanding or bad timing. This was a clear request and a clear refusal. And it forces one uncomfortable question right out into the open. Is this art or is this disrespect dressed up as self-expression? And if it is art, why does it require humiliating the person who supported you enough to show up? Before we go further, quick welcome. I'm Sabrina, and you're watching TLC Drama Live. And if this kind of unfiltered reality TV breakdown is your thing, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments whether you think Stig crossed the line here, because this debate is about to get messy. Back to that stage. The song is about Vicky, the ex Aviva already feels insecure about, the same ex her aunt warned her about, the same name Aviva hears and feels her stomach drop. And while Stig sings, Aviva does what a lot of people do when they feel trapped and embarrassed in public. She reaches out privately, texting friends, trying to ground herself, trying to make sense of why the man who claims to care about her would put her in this position. And this is where the story twists, because instead of noticing her pain, Stig notices her phone, and instead of asking why she's hurt, he decides she's unsupportive. That accusation hangs in the air, and it matters, because just days earlier, this same couple slept together 3 times in one night, unprotected, which means this is not a casual connection. This is trust, risk, and possible consequences wrapped into one impulsive decision. Pregnancy is now a silent possibility in the background, unspoken but real, raising the stakes of every choice that follows. So when Stig refuses one simple request and then flips the blame back onto Aviva, it is no longer about one song. It is about whose feelings matter when attention is on the line, and why saying no felt more important to him than protecting the person sitting in the audience, watching him choose the spotlight over her. To understand why that stage moment hit so hard, you have to rewind to how Stig was presented from the start, because his reputation never hid in the shadows. It walked in ahead of him wearing confidence, stories, and a past he treated like proof of depth instead of baggage. Stig came in known as the musician with a history, the guy whose art pulls from real life, real affairs, real mess, and that backstory includes Vicky, the woman whose name keeps resurfacing like a chorus nobody asked for. The same woman who inspired the song that would later blow up Aviva's sense of safety. Stig framed this as honesty, as creativity, as someone brave enough to tell his truth. And early on, Aviva wanted to believe that. Because optimism is easy when attraction is strong and the red flags feel abstract. Aviva entered this connection open, curious, willing to trust, choosing to see Stig as passionate rather than reckless, expressive rather than careless. And that choice makes sense when someone is charming and self-aware enough to narrate their own flaws before you get a chance to notice them. The problem starts when those flaws never stay in the past, because Vicky is not a closed chapter. She is a recurring reference, a song, a story Stig keeps alive, and every time her name comes up, Aviva has to decide whether she is being unreasonable or simply paying attention. This is where Aunt Spring steps in. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, raising concerns without accusations, pointing out patterns without trying to control the outcome. And that kind of calm warning often gets dismissed because it lacks urgency, because it does not come with fireworks. And because nobody wants to believe caution when chemistry feels easier. Aunt Spring sees the overlap between art and unresolved attachment, sees how often Vicky's name enters the room, and suggests Aviva protect her heart without demanding she walk away. What makes things uncomfortable is how Stig responds when Aviva expresses doubt, because instead of addressing the concern, he reframes it, positioning himself as misunderstood, painting Aviva's discomfort as insecurity, and slowly shifting the focus away from his choices and onto her reactions. Nothing is overt, nothing is shouted, which is why it feels slippery, because Aviva starts explaining herself more than questioning him, starts wondering if she is overreacting instead of asking why reassurance feels so scarce. By the time the song becomes an issue, the groundwork is already laid, and viewers sense something is off even if they cannot name it yet, because when reassurance always comes with defensiveness and concern always gets reframed as a problem, the imbalance starts long before anyone steps on a stage. What happens next feels quieter on the surface, but heavier underneath, because intimacy has a way of raising stakes without making any noise, and when Aviva and Stig sleep together 3 times in one night, without protection, it stops being a romantic detail and starts becoming a decision with consequences attached to it. This is not framed as scandal or shock. It is framed as trust. Because choosing not to protect yourselves is not about thrill. It is about belief. Belief that the other person is safe, honest, and thinking beyond the moment. And when one person is more impulsive and the other is more emotionally invested, that choice does not land evenly. For Aviva, intimacy deepens attachment and expectation. For Stig, it sits alongside creativity, attention, and a life built around intensity. And that difference matters because pregnancy does not split risk equally, fear does not show up the same way, and responsibility does not knock on both doors at the same volume. The unspoken tension is not about what happened in the bedroom. It is about what happens after. Because now, every argument carries more weight, every dismissal cuts deeper, and every ignored boundary feels less like a misunderstanding and more like a warning sign. When someone asks you to trust them with your body and your future, then turns around and minimizes your feelings in public, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. And the question that lingers is not about passion or chemistry, but about accountability. About who pays the price if impulsive. Choices turn into permanent ones, and who gets to walk away calling it art or freedom, while the other sits with the consequences. Just as that tension tightens, the story shifts, not away from conflict, but sideways, giving the audience a breather without letting go of the theme. And this is where Rick and Trisha enter, offering a different dynamic that somehow echoes the same imbalance in a quieter, more transactional way. Rick presents himself as generous, as the provider, the guy who pays rent and shows up financially. But generosity starts to curdle when it gets pulled out during arguments, when support turns into leverage, and when past trauma gets used as a shield against present accountability. The bikini argument seems small on paper, almost trivial, but it exposes something larger. Because Rick reacts not to the outfit itself, but to what it represents in his mind. Fear, loss of control, memories of exes who hurt him, and instead of owning that insecurity, he projects it onto Trisha. Trisha, meanwhile, is not asking for luxury or excess. She is asking for consistency and respect. And when Rick brings up money during conflict, it shifts the power dynamic instantly, reminding her who holds the purse strings and who gets to feel indebted. His unresolved past, including exes from other countries and lingering resentment, starts bleeding into the present, shaping how he interprets Trisha's actions. And slowly, subtly, the parallel forms. Because once again, a woman finds herself explaining her intentions, while a man explains his reactions, and the audience is left noticing how different stories keep circling the same problem. control disguised as care, insecurity framed as protection, and the quiet cost of loving someone who has not finished arguing with their past. The energy shifts when Rick and Trisha step in, not louder but tighter. Because this conflict does not explode in public, it simmers behind closed doors and slips out during moments that seem small until they are not. Rick likes to frame himself as generous, the guy who pays rent, who shows up financially, who believes providing equals caring. And at first, Trisha accepts that framing because stability feels comforting when love already feels fragile. The problem starts when generosity turns into a receipt book, because money stops being support and starts becoming a reference point during arguments. A quiet reminder of who holds leverage and who owes gratitude. The bikini argument exposes this dynamic in a way Rick probably did not expect. Because the outfit itself is not the issue, the reaction is. And his discomfort does not come from the fabric, but from the memories he drags into the present. Rick carries unresolved hurt from past relationships, including an ex who expected financial support and left scars he never processed. And instead of dealing with those feelings directly, he projects them onto Trisha, reading threat where none exists, reading intention where there is only normal behavior. When Trisha tries to laugh it off or reassure him, Rick escalates by circling back to money, to rent, to everything he has done for her, shifting the argument away from feelings and toward obligation. What makes this unsettling is how subtle it looks at first. Because Rick does not yell or insult, he explains, he rationalizes, he positions his reaction as reasonable concern, and in doing so, he places Trisha in a position where she has to prove innocence instead of expecting trust. Trisha wants partnership, not permission. And each time Rick brings up financial support during emotional conflict, the balance tilts further, even if neither of them names it out loud. This storyline matters because it mirrors something already unfolding elsewhere, not through the same actions, but through the same pattern. Where past wounds get imported into new relationships, where control hides behind care, and where one person's unresolved history quietly dictates the rules of the present. Rick is not a villain in a simple sense. He is a man reacting from fear he never addressed. But intention does not erase impact. And as these moments stack up, it becomes clear how easily generosity turns conditional, how fast love becomes transactional, and how often the person with less power ends up carrying emotional weight they did not create. As these two stories start running side by side, something clicks for the audience before it ever clicks for the people living it. Because the details differ, but the behavior rhymes in ways that feel uncomfortable once you see it. Stig and Rick are not doing the same things, yet they are reacting from the same place. Old wounds left open, past relationships still steering present choices, and when pressure hits, both men reach for the same defense, reframing the conflict so they never have to sit with responsibility. In Stig's case, Aviva's discomfort becomes insecurity, her request becomes control, and his refusal becomes artistic integrity. In Rick's case, Trisha's independence becomes threat, her choices become disrespect, and his anxiety becomes concern. What stands out is how measured both women are, because neither Aviva nor Trisha starts from accusation. They ask questions, they seek reassurance, they try to understand instead of attack. And that reasonable tone ironically makes it easier for their partners to sidestep the issue. When a woman stays calm, the reaction gets minimized, and when she finally shows hurt, it gets framed as overreaction, which creates a loop where she is always explaining herself while the original behavior stays unexamined. Projection sits at the center of this, even if no one says the word, because Stig keeps responding to Vicky instead of Aviva, and Rick keeps arguing with his ex instead of Trisha. And both men seem more focused on protecting their self-image than protecting the person in front of them. Every time conflict arises, the past quietly rewrites the present, turning new partners into stand-ins for old pain. And The cost of that rewrite lands on women who did not create the damage, but are asked to absorb it. As viewers, this is where sides start forming emotionally. Not because one person is perfect and the other is evil, but because patterns feel harder to excuse than isolated mistakes. When the same deflection shows up in different relationships, the stakes rise. Because it suggests this is not about one bad night or one awkward argument. It is about whether these men are capable of seeing the people they are with as separate from the people who hurt them before, and whether the women involved will keep adjusting themselves to fit narratives they never agreed to live inside. The stage lights hit and everything sharpens, because Stig is not just performing a song anymore, he is performing control, showing the audience, showing Aviva, showing himself that his choices take center stage. And while he belts out lyrics about Vicky, the ex who should have stayed in the past, Aviva's hands are shaking over her phone as she quietly messages friends, trying to process the humiliation without letting it explode publicly, trying to understand why someone she trusted would turn her feelings into decoration for applause. Every chord, every wink at the crowd, every flirtatious glance drives home the contrast between his freedom to act and her lack of power to stop it. And the weight of that difference presses down hard. When Stig notices Aviva texting, instead of pausing, he twists it, reframing her attempt to cope as evidence that she is unsupportive, as if empathy and boundaries are mutually exclusive. And in that moment, the audience can feel the emotional slap. Public embarrassment versus private. Accountability. A collision that leaves Aviva questioning herself, questioning her instincts, and wondering if she is overreacting while everyone else is applauding. Support, it seems, has been redefined as silence, and silence has been weaponized against her. This is the heaviest emotional load yet, because it is not about a fight, it is about recognition. Aviva sees herself in the reflection of someone who is confident and careless, someone who refuses to respect her limits, and suddenly, her own judgment becomes the thing she doubts the most. The text messages, the internal dialogue, the silent pleas to friends, all paint a picture of isolation wrapped inside intimacy. And while Stig stands on stage soaking up cheers, the very person who is supposed to feel closest is left feeling unseen. Every choice here carries consequences, but whose risk matters most when someone refuses to see the impact of their actions? And how long can a person survive being gaslit into questioning reality while the world claps? After the intensity of the stage, the story slows, not because tension is gone, but because understanding needs space. And this is where viewers can see the mechanics behind the chaos without labeling anyone broken. Stig's behavior is striking, yes, but it is rooted in patterns people rarely question. How some people mistake boundaries for control. How refusal feels like a personal attack instead of a communication of limits. And how intimacy, trust, and art can get tangled into a dangerous mix. When Aviva asked him not to perform the song while she was present, it wasn't censorship. It was a boundary. When Stig reframed it as restriction, it became easier for him to defend his choice without considering her feelings, and the gap between intent and impact grew wider. Artists, or anyone who performs their life as art, often hide behind expression, claiming honesty or authenticity to justify actions that hurt others. Stig may see the song as a story worth telling, an artistic confession about his past with Vicky, and in his mind, refusing the stage would be compromise, self-censorship, or weakness. That perspective, when voiced, feels compelling at first, because it frames conflict as principle rather than harm. The audience can hear the reasoning and even empathize briefly. He is a creator. He wants truth in performance. He wants recognition for courage to reveal past mistakes. But when that argument is tested against the impact, it starts to crumble. Principles do not erase consequences. Honesty does not cancel embarrassment. And the person being harmed, Aviva, still experiences pain, confusion, and humiliation. The gap between his self-conception and the reality of what he is doing exposes a thinness in his defense, because artistry does not grant immunity from responsibility, and intention does not equal consent. Meanwhile, Aviva's reaction is clear and consistent, which makes the imbalance harder to ignore. She communicates, she clarifies, she voices discomfort, yet the response is always reframing, spin, or dismissal. When someone positions themselves as principled while their partner absorbs the fallout, it becomes obvious whose world is prioritized and who is asked to adapt continuously. Observing this, viewers can feel why behavior can be confusing. Empathy for perspective is natural, but understanding cannot excuse ignoring another person's limits, and the story holds a mirror to how easily self-interest and narrative control can override fairness, even when no one is evil, only human. The tension ratchets higher because consequences are no longer abstract. They are unavoidable, and every decision made earlier starts landing like bricks. With Stig and Aviva, trust erodes in a way that feels subtle until it isn't. She saw him flaunt boundaries, misrepresent her reactions, and now every word he says carries the echo of past disregard. Every look, every casual joke, every flirtation outside the relationship becomes a reminder that her needs are negotiable, and that kind of slow burn chips away at certainty faster than any single explosive moment. The unprotected intimacy from earlier now carries weight beyond emotion. Pregnancy, though unspoken, hangs in the air, and the possibility of life-altering outcomes amplifies every interaction, every argument, every dismissal. Meanwhile, Rick and Trisha are confronting their own hidden variables, and the stakes rise when an ex in Colombia surfaces, something previously concealed but suddenly unavoidable. Secrets meant as self-protection now feel like weapons. Because when past relationships interfere with present ones, trust falters, and the people on the receiving end, here Trisha, err, forced to parse old wounds while negotiating new expectations. Rick's avoidance compounds the problem. By refusing to fully explain or address these hidden elements, he preserves his comfort at the cost of clarity and partnership, turning minor uncertainties into major tensions. Both men show a pattern of choosing avoidance over accountability, and the consequences cascade into the women's lives, who are left navigating emotional terrain they never volunteered for. Aviva must weigh public embarrassment against private risk, uncertainty against attachment, and constantly reassess the man she thought she knew. Trisha must reconcile Rick's generosity with the way it becomes leverage during conflict, and process how past relationships shape present behavior without feeling like she is overreacting. The escalation matters because it highlights a repeated imbalance. When one partner sidesteps responsibility, the other absorbs the emotional labor, becoming translator, mediator, and caretaker all at once. Trust erodes, boundaries are tested repeatedly, and the audience sees how small choices and unspoken risks compound into real, high-stakes consequences, leaving both women exhausted, questioning their own judgment, and struggling to reclaim autonomy in situations built on half-truths and selective attention. The emotional weight presses in, and it becomes impossible to ignore who is paying the price for avoidance and secrecy. Every unresolved moment begins to press harder now, because the tiny cracks that were easy to dismiss are no longer small. Aunt Spring's calm warnings from earlier start echoing in the viewer's mind, a quiet voice that foresaw patterns long before Aviva could see them herself. And suddenly, all the micro-incidents, the ignored requests, the flirtations, the reframed concerns, line up like dominoes, each one tipping into the next. What seemed minor when it happened now reads like a trail of clues leading to inevitable tension, and the audience starts piecing together the consequences before the cast even realizes how much is at stake. With Stig and Aviva, the public disregard, the unprotected intimacy, the constant reframing of boundaries accumulate into a pressure cooker, and Aviva's hesitation, her doubts, her messages to friends, all gain clarity in retrospect. Every glance Stig gave to the crowd, every lyric about Vicky, every casual dismissal of Aviva's feelings begins to feel like evidence, proof that small actions, unchecked, ripple into major emotional harm. The audience sees how her patience and trust have been stretched past limits. And the tension rises because there is no immediate resolution, only the weight of anticipation. What will Aviva do next when the emotional debt keeps mounting? At the same time, Rick and Trisha face echoes of secrecy and unresolved history. Rick's hidden ex in Colombia, his reliance on generosity as leverage, and his avoidance of accountability come into focus again. Trisha's attempts to navigate fairness, independence, and emotional labor now feel almost Sisyphean as viewers recognize how the past and present are colliding in ways she cannot fully control. Every conversation she had that seemed small now gains subtext. Every irritation or argument becomes proof of patterns repeating, and the audience begins to feel the tension not as isolated incidents, but as a web of consequences. This session matters because it sets up the payoff. The audience is primed, emotionally invested, and aware of stakes that the cast cannot yet fully process. The small choices, the subtle power plays, and the early warnings all converge into a sense of impending reckoning. Viewers are left on the edge, understanding the gravity of what could unfold next, feeling the pressure, the fear, and the anticipation, but not yet receiving closure, which keeps eyes glued and hearts racing. Every overlooked moment now matters, and the tension between action and consequence hangs heavy in the air. By the time we reach this point, the weight of everything is undeniable, because what started as flirtation, a song, a boundary crossed, or a financial disagreement has grown into a network of choices with real consequences, and the emotional stakes cannot be ignored. For Stig and Aviva, the public embarrassment, the repeated dismissal of boundaries, and the private reckoning around trust and intimacy leave a clear lesson. Accountability is not optional if respect is to survive. Stig's artistic framing does not erase Aviva's experience, and no charm or confidence can substitute for the impact of actions on someone who trusted you. Growth here would demand recognition of harm, an understanding of why boundaries matter, and a willingness to prioritize empathy over ego. But that growth is hard and uncomfortable, and the patterns that brought them here will repeat if the same impulses go unchecked. Rick and Trisha's story mirrors this lesson in a quieter but equally urgent way. Generosity cannot substitute for communication, avoidance cannot replace accountability, and unresolved trauma does not vanish simply because a new partner is present. Rick's tendency to reframe concerns, wield money as leverage, and carry past grievances into present arguments illustrates how easily the past can dictate behavior unless actively addressed. Trisha absorbs emotional labor she never signed up for, and while she has handled it with patience, the narrative shows that enduring imbalance is not sustainable without change. Both couples highlight how repeated patterns, dismissal, projection, avoidance, amplify damage over time, and how accountability is a deliberate, often uncomfortable choice. The resolution is emotional rather than neat, because life rarely offers clean endings. Aviva doubts herself, Trisha questions trust, and both men confront consequences they cannot fully control, even as they struggle to justify or protect themselves. The stories close here not with tidy answers, but with a sense of inevitability, that unresolved issues will persist unless honesty, respect, and awareness are actively embraced. And while the screen may fade, the fallout is already moving. Texts, rumors, and social media reactions are circulating, leaving a trail of receipts and unanswered questions. For viewers, the next chapter is already in motion, promising revelations that build on these patterns, testing whether lessons will be learned or repeated, and hinting at more drama that no one can ignore. The tension lingers, because these stories are far from over, and watching what comes next is unavoidable.